The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured grounds of Highgrove House as Camilla Parker Bowles stood at her bedroom window, her fingers trembling slightly as she held a letter that had arrived with the early post. The cream-colored envelope bore no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakably familiar. After 37 years of marriage to Prince Charles, now King Charles III, she had learned to recognize the signs of trouble brewing beneath the surface of their carefully constructed royal facade. The letter contained information that could destroy everything she had worked so hard to build. Her past, which she had buried so deeply that even she sometimes forgot the details, was threatening to resurface in the most public and humiliating way possible. The secrets she had kept hidden were about to be exposed to the world, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Camilla had always been a woman who understood the game of royal politics better than most. She knew how to navigate the treacherous waters of public opinion, how to present the perfect image of a devoted wife and stepmother, and how to carry herself with the dignity befitting her position as queen consort. But this letter threatened to strip away all of those carefully crafted layers and reveal the truth that lay beneath. The secret dated back to her youth, long before she had ever dreamed of marrying into the royal family. In 1971, when she was just 24 years old and working as a secretary in London, Camilla had become involved with a man who was not Andrew Parker Bowles, her future first husband. The relationship had been passionate and intense, lasting for nearly 2 years before ending in scandal and heartbreak. What made this particular secret so dangerous was not just the affair itself, but what had resulted from it. During those turbulent months in 1973, Camilla had discovered she was pregnant. The timing was inconvenient, to say the least, as she had already begun her courtship with Andrew, a dashing cavalry officer who seemed like the perfect match for a woman of her social standing. Faced with an impossible choice, Camilla had made a decision that would haunt her for decades to come. She had secretly given birth to a daughter in a private clinic in Switzerland, far from the prying eyes of London society. The baby had been immediately placed for adoption with a wealthy family in France, and Camilla had returned to England as if nothing had happened. Only 3 people had known the truth: Camilla herself, her sister Annabelle, and the baby's father, a charismatic journalist named Marcus Thornfield who had been covering the social scene for various London newspapers. Marcus had wanted to marry her and raise their child together, but Camilla had been terrified of the scandal it would cause. Her family's reputation, her future prospects, everything would have been ruined. So she had chosen the safe path, marrying Andrew and building the life that was expected of her. She had convinced herself that she had done the right thing, that her daughter would have a better life with her adoptive family than she could have provided as an unmarried mother in the 1970s. But the guilt had never left her, eating away at her conscience like a cancer. Now, 37 years later, that decision had come back to haunt her in the most spectacular way possible. The letter in her hands was from her daughter, Sophie Dubois, who had spent years searching for her biological parents. Through a combination of private investigators and DNA testing, Sophie had finally uncovered the truth about her parentage. But Sophie wasn't interested in a quiet reunion or a private acknowledgement of their relationship. She wanted justice, recognition, and, most importantly, she wanted the world to know that the Queen Consort of England had abandoned her own child. Sophie had already approached several tabloid newspapers with her story, complete with DNA evidence and copies of the original adoption papers. The letter was both an ultimatum and a threat. Sophie demanded a public meeting with Camilla within the week, or she would go to the press with her story. She wanted Camilla to acknowledge her publicly as her daughter and to explain why she had been given up for adoption. If Camilla refused, Sophie promised to make her story public in the most damaging way possible. Camilla's hands shook as she reread the letter for the 3rd time. She could already imagine the headlines, the endless speculation, the damage it would cause to the monarchy. Charles was still adjusting to his new role as king, and the last thing he needed was a scandal involving his wife's secret past. The public had only just begun to accept Camilla as queen, and this revelation could undo years of careful image rehabilitation. She thought about Sophie, the daughter she had never known. What kind of woman had she become? What kind of life had she lived? Camilla had often wondered about her over the years, especially during quiet moments when the weight of her secret felt particularly heavy. She had imagined her as a successful, happy woman who had never needed to know the truth about her origins. But, clearly, Sophie felt differently. The tone of her letter was angry and accusatory, filled with hurt and resentment that had been building for years. She wrote about feeling abandoned and rejected, about growing up always wondering why her biological parents hadn't wanted her. She described the pain of discovering that her biological mother was one of the most famous women in the world, living a life of luxury, while Sophie had struggled to find her place in the world. Camilla closed her eyes and tried to compose herself. She had faced public scrutiny before, weathered storms that had seemed insurmountable at the time. The divorce from Andrew, the years as Charles's mistress while he was married to Diana, the gradual acceptance by the royal family, and the British public, she had survived it all. But this felt different, more personal, more devastating. The irony was not lost on her that she had spent years being criticized for her role in the breakdown of Charles and Diana's marriage, only to now face exposure of an even more damaging secret from her own past. The public had eventually forgiven her for the affair, seeing it as a love story that had finally found its happy ending. But abandoning a child? That was the kind of scandal that could destroy her reputation permanently. She walked to her dressing table and sat down heavily in the antique chair. In the mirror, she saw a woman who had aged well despite the pressures of royal life, but whose eyes now held a fear and vulnerability that she usually kept hidden. She had spent so many years learning to project strength and composure that she had almost forgotten how to be truly vulnerable. The sound of footsteps in the hallway outside her door made her quickly fold the letter and slip it into a drawer. Charles would be leaving for his morning walk soon, and she couldn't let him see her in this state. Not yet. She needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to handle this crisis before it spiraled completely out of control. But even as she tried to compose herself, Camilla knew that her world was about to change forever. The carefully constructed life she had built, the respect she had finally earned, the peace she had found in her marriage to Charles, all of it was now under threat. And the worst part was that she had no one to blame but herself. As she heard Charles calling her name from downstairs, Camilla took a deep breath and prepared to face another day of pretending that everything was normal. But she knew that this might be one of the last normal days she would have for a very long time. The secrets that she had buried so deep were finally clawing their way to the surface, and there might be no stopping them now. The game had changed, and Camilla wasn't sure she knew how to play by these new rules. For the first time in years, she felt truly powerless, at the mercy of forces beyond her control. The letter from Sophie was just the beginning, and she could only imagine what other revelations might be coming. Outside her window, life at Highgrove continued as normal. The gardeners tended to the roses, the security detail made their rounds, and the staff prepared for another day of royal duties. But inside the privacy of her bedroom, Camilla sat with the weight of her past pressing down on her shoulders, knowing that everything was about to change in ways she couldn't have imagined. The secret that had shaped so much of her life was about to become public knowledge, and she would have to find a way to survive the storm that was coming. But for now, all she could do was take things one day at a time and hope that somehow she would find a way through this crisis with her dignity and her marriage intact. As she finally stood up and prepared to join Charles for breakfast, Camilla caught one last glimpse of herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was about to face the biggest challenge of her life, and she could only hope that she was strong enough to weather whatever storm was coming her way. The letter from Sophie had changed everything, and there was no going back. The secrets were about to come to light, whether Camilla was ready for them or not. 3 days had passed since Camilla received Sophie's letter, and the weight of her secret was becoming unbearable. She had barely slept, picking at her meals, and struggling to maintain her usual composure during official engagements. Charles had noticed her distraction, but attributed it to the stress of their busy schedule. If only he knew the real reason for her anxiety. On Thursday morning, Camilla made a decision that surprised even herself. She would meet with Sophie, but not on Sophie's terms. Instead of waiting for her daughter to dictate the circumstances of their reunion, Camilla would take control of the situation. She instructed her private secretary to arrange a discreet meeting at a small hotel in Bath, away from the prying eyes of London's media. The Thornfield Hotel was an ironic choice, given that it shared a name with Sophie's biological father, but Camilla hadn't made the connection when she chose it. All she cared about was that it was private, secure, and far enough from royal residences to avoid unwanted attention. She told Charles that she needed a day to herself for personal errands, something that wasn't unusual given her independent nature. As her car pulled up to the modest Georgian building, Camilla felt her heart racing in a way it hadn't since her wedding day. She was about to come face to face with the daughter she had given away 37 years ago, the child who had grown up without ever knowing her mother's love or guidance. The guilt that had been her constant companion for decades was about to be given a face and a voice. Sophie was already waiting in the hotel's small sitting room when Camilla arrived. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same high cheekbones, the same intelligent green eyes, even the same way of holding her chin when she was nervous. But where Camilla had learned to project royal composure, Sophie radiated a raw intensity that spoke of a life lived without the constraints of protocol and expectation. She was dressed simply but elegantly in a navy blue dress that complemented her auburn hair. Her posture was straight and confident, but Camilla could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped her handbag as if it were an anchor in a storm. This was clearly as difficult for Sophie as it was for her mother. "Your Majesty," Sophie said, rising from her chair as Camilla entered the room. There was no warmth in her voice, no indication that she saw this as anything other than a business meeting. The formal address felt like a slap in the face to Camilla, who had hoped for at least some recognition of their biological connection. "Please, call me Camilla," she replied, settling into the chair across from her daughter. "I think we can dispense with formalities given the circumstances." Sophie studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "I wasn't sure you would come. I thought you might try to handle this through lawyers or private investigators. I'm surprised you're here in person." "You're my daughter," Camilla said quietly. "Whatever else has happened between us, whatever mistakes I've made, that fact remains. You deserve to hear from me directly." The words seemed to catch Sophie off guard. For a moment, her carefully constructed armor cracked, and Camilla caught a glimpse of the hurt little girl underneath. But Sophie quickly recovered, her expression hardening once again. "Your daughter," she repeated bitterly. "Is that what I am? Because for 37 years, I thought I was an orphan. For 37 years, I wondered what was so wrong with me that my own mother couldn't bear to keep me." Camilla felt as if she had been struck. "Sophie, it wasn't like that. It wasn't about you being wrong or unwanted. It was about circumstances, about the time period, about choices that seemed impossible to make." "Then, explain it to me," Sophie demanded, leaning forward in her chair. "Explain how a mother gives up her healthy baby daughter and never looks back. Explain how you could build this perfect life, marry a prince, become a queen, and never once try to find out what happened to the child you abandoned." The accusation hit its mark, and Camilla felt tears building behind her eyes. She had rehearsed this conversation 100 times in her mind over the past 3 days, but nothing had prepared her for the raw pain in Sophie's voice, the anger that had clearly been building for years. "I was 26 years old," Camilla began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Unmarried, with no money of my own, no way to support a child. The father, your father, he wanted to marry me, but my family would have disowned me. The scandal would have destroyed any chance I had of a decent marriage or a stable life. So you chose your reputation over your child," Sophie said flatly. "I chose what I thought was best for you," Camilla replied, though even as she said the words, they sounded hollow. "I thought you would have a better life with a family who could provide for you properly, who could give you opportunities one never could." Sophie laughed bitterly. "A better life? Do you want to know about my better life? The Dubois family treated me like an obligation, not a daughter. They provided for my basic needs, but never let me forget that I wasn't really theirs. I spent my childhood feeling like an outsider in my own home, always wondering where I came from, always feeling like something was missing." Camilla's heart broke a little more with each word. This wasn't the happy ending she had imagined for her daughter. In her mind, Sophie had grown up loved and cherished by her adoptive family, never wanting for anything, never questioning her origins. The reality was far more painful than anything she had allowed herself to consider. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate even as she spoke them. "I'm so sorry, Sophie. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought." "You thought wrong," Sophie interrupted. "But that's not even the worst part. The worst part is that you went on to have the perfect life. You married into the aristocracy. You had children you kept. You became part of the most famous family in the world. And all the while, I was growing up feeling abandoned and unwanted, never knowing that my biological mother was living in luxury just a few hundred miles away." The accusation stung because there was truth in it. Camilla had indeed gone on to have what many would consider a charmed life. She had married Andrew Parker Bowles and had 2 children, Tom and Laura, whom she had raised with love and attention. She had maintained her position in society, eventually catching the eye of Prince Charles and beginning the relationship that would define the rest of her life. But it hadn't been as simple as Sophie made it sound. Camilla's marriage to Andrew had been troubled from the beginning, marked by his infidelities and her growing feelings for Charles. The affair with the Prince of Wales had brought its own set of challenges and scandals, years of public humiliation and criticism that had tested her strength and resilience. It wasn't perfect, Camilla said softly. My life wasn't perfect. I faced my own challenges, my own scandals, my own moments of public humiliation. But you're right that I had advantages you didn't have, opportunities that should have been yours. Sophie seemed unmoved by this admission. I don't want your pity or your regrets. I want acknowledgement. I want recognition. I want the world to know that Queen Camilla abandoned her own daughter and never looked back. Is that really what you want? Camilla asked. Public humiliation? Revenge? Will that heal the hurt you've carried all these years? Maybe not, Sophie admitted. But it's honest. It's the truth. And I'm tired of living with lies and secrets. Camilla understood that feeling more than her daughter might realize. She had spent decades living with the weight of this secret, carrying the guilt and regret like a stone in her chest. There had been times when she had wanted nothing more than to confess everything, to find Sophie and try to explain, to somehow make amends for the choice she had made all those years ago. But royal life didn't allow for such luxuries. Everything was calculated, managed, controlled. Her personal feelings and desires had to be subordinated to the needs of the institution, the reputation of the monarchy, the delicate balance of public opinion that kept the royal family relevant and respected. If I acknowledge you publicly, Camilla said carefully, it won't just affect me. It will affect my husband, my stepchildren, the entire royal family. The monarchy is already under scrutiny, already facing questions about its relevance and legitimacy. This kind of scandal could do real damage to an institution that employs thousands of people and represents Britain around the world. Sophie's expression hardened again. So once again, your reputation and position are more important than your daughter. That's not what I'm saying, Camilla protested. I'm trying to explain the complexities involved, the consequences that go beyond just our personal relationship. Then, what are you saying? Sophie demanded. Are you willing to acknowledge me publicly or not? Are you willing to tell the truth about what you did? Or are you going to hide behind your royal title and pretend this conversation never happened? Camilla found herself at a crossroads that she had never wanted to face. On one side was the life she had built, the position she had earned through years of patience and perseverance, the respect she had finally gained from the British public. On the other side was her daughter, the child she had given away in a moment of fear and weakness, demanding the acknowledgement and recognition that was rightfully hers. I need time, Camilla said finally. This isn't a decision I can make lightly. There are people I need to consult, preparations that need to be made if we're going to do this properly. How much time? Sophie asked. A week. Give me 1 week to figure out how to handle this situation in a way that's fair to everyone involved. Sophie considered this request for a long moment. 1 week. But I want something in return. I want to meet my half-siblings. I want to meet Tom and Laura and tell them they have a sister they never knew about. The request caught Camilla completely off guard. She hadn't considered how this revelation would affect her other children, how they would react to learning that they had an older sister who had been hidden from them their entire lives. Tom and Laura had always been close to her, supportive and loyal despite the challenges of growing up in the shadow of her relationship with Charles. Sophie, Camilla began, then stopped herself. What right did she have to deny Sophie the chance to know her siblings? What right did she have to continue keeping the secret from Tom and Laura? They have a right to know, Sophie continued. Just like I had a right to know about them. Just like I had a right to know about you. Camilla nodded slowly, understanding that her world was about to change in ways she couldn't control or predict. The careful balance she had maintained for so many years was about to be disrupted, and she could only hope that her family would survive the upheaval that was coming. I'll arrange it, she said quietly. I'll tell them about you, and if they're willing, I'll arrange for you to meet. For the first time since they had begun talking, Sophie's expression softened slightly. Thank you. That's all I've ever wanted, to be acknowledged as part of this family, to not have to pretend I don't exist. As they said their goodbyes and made arrangements for future contact, Camilla felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. The secret was finally coming out. The burden she had carried for nearly 4 decades was about to be lifted. But she had no idea what the consequences would be, or whether her family and her marriage would survive the revelations that were coming. The drive back to Highgrove gave her time to think about how she would tell Charles, how she would explain to the man she loved that she had been hiding something so significant for their entire relationship. The conversation with Sophie had been just the beginning. The real challenges were still ahead. The evening air was crisp as Camilla walked through the gardens at Highgrove, trying to summon the courage to tell Charles about Sophie. She had been rehearsing the conversation for hours, but every version sounded worse than the last. How do you tell your husband of 17 years that you've been hiding a daughter from him their entire relationship? Charles was in his study when she finally returned to the house, reading through diplomatic papers with his characteristic intensity. He looked up as she entered, immediately noticing her pale complexion and the tension in her shoulders. "Darling, you look dreadful," he said, setting aside his documents and rising from his desk. "Has something happened? You've seemed distracted all week." Camilla closed the door behind her and moved to the leather sofa by the fireplace. "Charles, we need to talk. There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you years ago." The gravity in her voice made him sit up straighter. In all their years together, through scandals and crises and public humiliation, he had rarely seen her look so shaken. He joined her on the sofa, taking her hands in his. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together," he said gently. "We always have." But even as he spoke the reassuring words, Charles felt a chill of apprehension. They had survived Diana's death, the public's initial rejection of their relationship, and his mother's gradual acceptance of Camilla as his future wife. What could be so terrible that it would shake his usually unflappable wife to her core? Camilla took a shaky breath and began to speak. She told him about Marcus Thornfield, about the pregnancy in 1973, about the secret adoption in Switzerland. She watched his face change as the implications sank in, saw the shock, and confusion replaced the initial concern in his eyes. "You have a daughter," he said slowly, as if testing the words to see how they sounded. "You've had a daughter for 37 years, and you never told me." "I never told anyone," Camilla said desperately. "Only my sister knew, and she's kept the secret all these years." "Charles, you have to understand, it was different then. An unmarried mother, especially in my social circle, it would have been social suicide. My family would have disowned me. But we've been together for decades," Charles said, his voice growing harder. "Through everything we've faced, all the times we've supported each other through impossible situations, and you never trusted me enough to share this?" The hurt in his voice was almost worse than anger would have been. Camilla could see that he felt betrayed, not just by the secret itself, but by her lack of faith in him, in their relationship. "It wasn't about trust," she protested. "It was about protection. I was protecting you, protecting our marriage, protecting the monarchy. Can you imagine if this had come out during the early years of our relationship? The press would have torn us apart. So instead you let me find out now, when I'm king, when the revelation of the secret could cause even more damage." Charles stood up and began pacing, a habit Camilla recognized from their most difficult conversations. "How did this come to light? How did you find out she knows?" Camilla told him about Sophie's letter, about their meeting that afternoon, about her daughter's demand for public acknowledgement. With each detail, she could see Charles's agitation growing. He was thinking like a king now, calculating the potential damage to the crown, considering the political implications. "She wants to go public," he said, and it wasn't a question. "She's given me a week to decide how to handle it. If I don't acknowledge her voluntarily, she's threatened to take her story to the tabloids." Charles stopped pacing and turned to face her. "And what do you want to do?" The question caught Camilla off guard. After days of feeling like she was at the mercy of forces beyond her control, no one had asked her what she actually wanted. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to acknowledge her, to finally be honest about what happened. But I'm terrified of what it will do to our family, to your reign, to everything we've built together." "Tell me about her," Charles said, settling back down beside her. "What is she like?" Camilla described her meeting with Sophie, her daughter's anger and pain, the resemblance between them that had taken her breath away. She found herself talking about the guilt she had carried for decades, the questions she had always wondered about, but never dared to investigate. "She's brilliant," Camilla said softly. "Educated, articulate, successful in her own right. She works as an art curator in Paris, has built a life for herself despite everything. But she's angry, Charles. So angry about being abandoned, about growing up feeling unwanted. And she has every right to be." Charles listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. Camilla had always admired his ability to see beyond the immediate crisis to the human story underneath. It was one of the qualities that made him a good king, this capacity for empathy even in the most challenging circumstances. "What about Tom and Laura?" he asked finally. "Do they know they have a sister?" "Not yet. Sophie wants to meet them, and I think they deserve to know the truth. But I have no idea how they'll react. They've always been protective of me, but this might be too much even for them to accept." The next few days passed in a blur of difficult conversations and emotional revelations. Camilla decided to tell Tom and Laura separately, giving each of them time to process the news before bringing them together to meet Sophie. Tom's reaction was perhaps the most surprising. As the elder of her two children, he had always been the more serious and responsible one. But he took the news with remarkable equanimity. He was hurt that she had kept the secret for so long, but he seemed to understand the impossible position she had been in as a young woman. "I wish you had trusted me enough to tell me," he said when they met for lunch in London. "But I can understand why you made the choices you did. It was a different time, and you were so young." Laura's reaction was more volatile. She had inherited her mother's strong personality, but lacked the years of royal training that had taught Camilla to control her emotions in public. When Camilla told her about Sophie, Laura's first response was anger. "How could you give away your own child?" she demanded during a heated conversation at Camilla's private office. "How could you abandon a baby and then go on to raise us as if nothing had happened?" "It wasn't like that," Camilla tried to explain. "I loved you and Tom from the moment you were born. Having to give up Sophie didn't make me love you any less." "But it means you loved her less," Laura shot back. "It means that when things got difficult, your first instinct was to get rid of the problem rather than face it." The accusation stung because there was truth in it. Camilla had chosen the path of least resistance, the socially acceptable solution that allowed her to maintain her position and her family's approval. She had sacrificed her relationship with Sophie to preserve everything else in her life. But over the following days, as Laura had time to process the revelation, her anger began to soften into something more complex. She started asking questions about Sophie, wanting to know what she looked like, what she did for a living, whether she had children of her own. "I want to meet her," Laura finally said during their third conversation about the situation. "If she's our sister, I want to know her. But I'm scared too. What if she hates us for having the life she was denied?" It was a fear that had occurred to Camilla as well. Sophie's resentment toward her was understandable, but would it extend to Tom and Laura? Would she see them as reminders of her own abandonment, or would she be able to separate them from the choices their mother had made? The meeting was arranged for the following weekend at a private dining room in a discreet London hotel. Camilla arrived early, her stomach churning with anxiety. This would be the first time her three children had been in the same room together, the first time the family she had fragmented through her choices would be whole again. Sophie arrived first, looking elegant, but nervous in a dark green dress that complemented her eyes. She had clearly taken care with her appearance, but Camilla could see the tension in her posture, the way she kept checking her watch as if calculating escape routes. Tom and Laura arrived together, having decided to present a united front. The moment they walked into the room, the family resemblance was unmistakable. All three of Camilla's children shared similar bone structure, the same expressive eyes, the same way of carrying themselves when they were nervous. The initial conversation was stilted and formal, everyone painfully aware of the strangeness of the situation. But gradually, as they talked about neutral topics like work and travel, the tension began to ease. Sophie's anger seemed to soften in the presence of her half-siblings, who were clearly making an effort to welcome her despite the unusual circumstances. "I've always wondered what it would be like to have a sister," Laura said during a lull in the conversation. "I imagined someone I could talk to about things that Tom wouldn't understand." "I always wanted siblings," Sophie replied quietly. Growing up as an only child with adoptive parents who already had their own biological children, I always felt like an outsider. The pain in her voice was evident, and Camilla saw Tom and Laura exchange a meaningful look. Whatever resentment they might have felt about their mother's secret, it was clear that they felt sympathy for their sister's lonely childhood. As the afternoon progressed, the conversation became more natural, more familial. Sophie told them about her work at the Musée d'Orsay, her small apartment in the Marais, her love of travel and art. Tom and Laura shared stories about their own lives, their children, the challenges of growing up in the shadow of royal scandal. "Were you angry when Mother married Charles?" Sophie asked during dessert. Did it feel like she was choosing her new life over her family? At first, Tom admitted. especially during the Diana years, when the whole country seemed to hate her. But then, I saw how happy they were together, how much they supported each other through everything. I realized that she deserved to be loved, even if the circumstances weren't ideal. The public never understood what she went through, Laura added. The criticism, the constant scrutiny, the way people blamed her for everything that went wrong with Charles and Diana's marriage. She needed someone who would stand by her through all of that. Sophie listened thoughtfully to their defense of their mother. I suppose I've been so focused on what she did to me that I never really considered what her life was like afterward. I assumed she just moved on and forgot about me. She never forgot, Tom said gently. I can see that now, looking back. There were times when she seemed sad for no reason, times when she would get this distant look in her eyes. I think she was thinking about you. For the first time since they had sat down, Sophie looked directly at Camilla. Is that true? Did you think about me? Camilla felt tears building in her eyes. Every day, every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone in Tom and Laura's lives. I wondered where you were, what you looked like, whether you were happy. The guilt never went away, Sophie. It never got easier. The admission seemed to break down the last of Sophie's defenses. For the first time since they had met, she allowed herself to show vulnerability, to acknowledge the pain that had driven her to seek out her biological family. I don't know how to forgive you, she said honestly. I don't know if I can. But I want to try to understand, to see if we can build some kind of relationship despite everything that's happened. It wasn't the reconciliation that Camilla had hoped for, but it was a beginning. As they made plans to meet again, as Tom and Laura exchanged contact information with their newfound sister, Camilla felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. The conversation about going public could wait. For now, it was enough that her family was finally complete, that the secret that had divided them for so many years was finally in the open. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a family should. The week that followed the family meeting was a whirlwind of secret consultations and careful planning. Charles had assembled a small team of trusted advisors to help navigate the crisis, including his private secretary, the palace's communications director, and the family's longtime legal counsel. The group met in absolute secrecy at Clarence House, discussing options and preparing for various scenarios. Meanwhile, Sophie had grown impatient with the slow pace of decision-making. She called Camilla twice during the week, pressing for a definitive answer about public acknowledgement. Her tone had softened somewhat after meeting Tom and Laura, but her determination remained unwavering. I understand that this is complicated for your family, Sophie said during their second phone conversation. But you have to understand that I've been waiting my entire life for this moment. I'm not going to disappear quietly again. Camilla found herself caught between competing loyalties. On one side was Sophie, her daughter who deserved recognition and acknowledgement after decades of abandonment. On the other side was her duty to the crown, to Charles, and to the stability of the monarchy during a crucial period in his reign. The situation became even more complicated when William and Harry learned about the crisis through palace gossip. Both princes requested private meetings with their stepmother, conversations that proved to be pivotal in shaping the family's response to the scandal. William's reaction was characteristically measured and thoughtful. He met with Camilla at Kensington Palace on a rainy Thursday afternoon, his expression serious as she explained the situation for what felt like the 100th time that week. I can't say I'm not disappointed that you kept this secret, he said after she finished her explanation. But I understand why you made the choices you did. The real question now is how we handle this in a way that's best for everyone involved, including Sophie. His pragmatic approach was exactly what Camilla had hoped for. William had always been the most politically astute of Charles's sons, understanding instinctively how personal scandals could affect the monarchy's reputation and stability. What do you think we should do? Camilla asked. I think we need to get ahead of this story, William replied. If Sophie is determined to go public, then we need to control the narrative rather than let the tabloids create their own version of events. We need to tell this story on our terms, with dignity and honesty. Harry's reaction was more emotional and complex. When he met with Camilla the following day, his first concern was for Sophie herself rather than the political implications of her existence. She must be devastated, he said, pacing around Camilla's sitting room at Clarence House. Growing up not knowing who her real parents were, discovering that her biological mother is part of our family but was never acknowledged. It reminds me too much of my own struggles with family secrets and hidden truths. The comparison to his own complicated relationship with royal life hit home for Camilla. Harry had suffered enormously from the public nature of his parents' divorce, the constant media scrutiny, and the feeling that his personal life was always secondary to the needs of the institution. "I don't want Sophie to go through what I went through," Harry continued. "The feeling that your own family is more concerned with protecting their image than protecting you. If she's my sister, then she deserves our support, not our denial." Both conversations reinforced what Camilla already knew in her heart. The right thing to do was to acknowledge Sophie publicly, regardless of the potential consequences. The question was how to do it in a way that minimized damage to the monarchy while giving Sophie the recognition she deserved. The answer came from an unexpected source. Tom, who had been quietly researching similar situations in other royal families, discovered that the Dutch royal family had successfully navigated a comparable scandal in the 1990s when it was revealed that Prince Bernhard had fathered illegitimate children. The Dutch had handled the situation with transparency and dignity, ultimately strengthening rather than weakening public support for the monarchy. "The key," Tom explained during a family conference call, "is to own the story completely. No half measures, no attempts to downplay or justify. Just complete honesty about what happened and a clear commitment to making things right." Sophie's patience finally ran out on Friday evening. She called Camilla with an ultimatum: acknowledge her publicly by Sunday, or she would hold a press conference on Monday morning with 3 major newspapers and 2 television networks already confirmed to attend. "I'm sorry it's come to this," Sophie said, her voice steady but firm. "But I've given you more time than I initially promised, and I can't wait any longer. I need to know that I exist in your world, not just in secret meetings and whispered conversations." That night, Camilla and Charles made their final decision. They would acknowledge Sophie in a carefully crafted statement to be released on Saturday morning, followed by a more detailed interview with a respected BBC journalist on Sunday evening. Sophie would be invited to participate in the interview if she chose, giving her a platform to tell her own story in her own words. The statement was written and rewritten dozens of times, each word carefully chosen to convey both honesty and dignity. The King and Queen Consort wished to acknowledge the existence of Sophie Dubois, the Queen Consort's biological daughter, who was placed for adoption in 1973. This deeply personal matter has remained private for many years, but recent circumstances have made it appropriate to share this information publicly. The Queen Consort deeply regrets the pain that her decisions as a young woman may have caused, and the royal family looks forward to developing a relationship with Sophie based on love, respect, and understanding. The statement was released at 10 a.m. on Saturday morning, and the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, the palace switchboard was flooded with calls from journalists around the world. Social media exploded with speculation, criticism, and support in roughly equal measures. The story dominated news broadcasts across Britain and much of the Commonwealth. But, perhaps most surprisingly, the initial public reaction was more sympathetic than Camilla had dared to hope. Many people seemed to understand the impossible position she had been in as a young, unmarried woman in the 1970s. Others praised her for finally acknowledging the truth rather than continuing to deny Sophie's existence. The tabloids, predictably, were less charitable. Headlines like "Queen's Secret Shame" and "Abandoned Princess" screamed from newsstands across London. But even the most critical coverage acknowledged that Camilla had chosen to come forward voluntarily rather than being forced to admit the truth by external pressure. Sophie's response to the statement was measured and gracious. She released her own brief comment through a French public relations firm. "I am grateful that my biological mother has chosen to acknowledge our relationship publicly. This represents an important step toward healing for our family, and I look forward to building a positive relationship with all of my siblings." The BBC interview was scheduled for Sunday evening at 7 p.m., primetime viewing when the maximum number of people would be watching. Charles would appear alongside Camilla to show his support, while Sophie would participate via video link from Paris. As Saturday evening approached, Camilla found herself feeling surprisingly calm. The worst was over, the secret was out, the initial reaction had been manageable, and her family had rallied around her with love and support. Whatever happened in the interview, she would face it with honesty and dignity. But the real test would come on Sunday, when she would have to look into the cameras and explain to the British people how their Queen Consort had made one of the most difficult decisions of her life. She would have to find a way to convey the impossible circumstances of 1973 to a 2024 audience, to help people understand choices that seemed incomprehensible by modern standards. Most importantly, she would have to convince Sophie and the watching world that her decision to give up her daughter had been made out of love rather than selfishness, out of a genuine belief that Sophie would have a better life without her rather than a desire to protect her own reputation and prospects. The interview would be the most important conversation of Camilla's life, the moment when she would either succeed in rebuilding her relationship with Sophie or lose her daughter forever. As she prepared for what was to come, she could only hope that 3 decades of royal training and grace under pressure would be enough to see her through the most challenging moment of her reign as queen consort. Sunday was coming, and, with it, the chance to finally make things right with the daughter she had never stopped loving, despite the choices that had kept them apart for so many years. The secrets were coming to light, and there was no going back. All she could do now was face the truth with courage and hope for forgiveness from the daughter who had every right to withhold it. The stage was set for a conversation that would change everything, not just for Camilla and Sophie, but for the entire royal family and the millions of people around the world who would be watching. In less than 24 hours, the most closely guarded secret of Camilla's life would become public knowledge, and she would finally have the chance to explain herself to the daughter she had given away and the public who had accepted her as their queen. Sunday evening arrived with an unusual stillness across Britain. From London's bustling streets to the quiet countryside, millions of people settled in front of their televisions to watch what many were calling the most important royal interview since Princess Diana's famous BBC appearance in 1995. The stakes could not have been higher for Camilla, who knew that the next hour would determine not only her relationship with Sophie, but her legacy as queen consort. The BBC had chosen their most experienced interviewer, Sarah Morrison, a veteran journalist known for her ability to ask difficult questions while maintaining dignity and respect. The interview was being conducted in the Blue Drawing Room at Buckingham Palace, a formal yet intimate setting that would convey both the gravity of the situation and the personal nature of the conversation. Camilla sat beside Charles on an antique sofa, her hands folded calmly in her lap despite the turmoil she felt inside. She had chosen a simple navy blue dress and minimal jewelry, wanting to appear approachable rather than intimidating. Charles wore a dark suit and maintained the supportive yet serious expression he had perfected over decades of public appearances. On a large monitor positioned to their left, Sophie appeared via video link from her apartment in Paris. She had chosen to wear a cream-colored blouse that complemented her auburn hair, and her expression was attentive but guarded. The technical setup allowed for natural conversation between all parties, though the physical distance seemed to symbolize the emotional gulf that still existed between mother and daughter. Your Majesty, Sarah Morrison began, addressing both Charles and Camilla formally. Thank you for agreeing to this interview. This is clearly a deeply personal matter, but one that has significant public interest. Camilla, let's start with the most basic question. Why did you decide to speak publicly about Sophie now? Camilla took a deep breath, drawing on all her years of media training to project calm confidence. Because it was time, she said simply. Sophie deserves to be acknowledged, to be recognized as my daughter and as part of this family. The circumstances of her birth and adoption have been a private matter for 37 years, but she has every right to exist publicly in our family, not as a secret to be hidden. But you kept this secret for decades, even from your husband. Why was secrecy necessary for so long? I was 26 years old when Sophie was born, Camilla replied, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. It was 1973, and the social attitudes toward unmarried mothers were very different then. My family, my social circle, the world I lived in, it would have been devastating for everyone involved. I genuinely believe that Sophie would have a better life with a family who could provide for her properly, without the scandal and social stigma that would have followed her if I had kept her. Sarah turned to address Sophie directly through the video link. Sophie, you were raised by adoptive parents in France. What was your childhood like? And when did you first begin to suspect that your biological parents might be different from what you had been told? Sophie's voice was clear and composed as she answered. My adoptive parents told me I was adopted from a young age, but they never had any information about my biological family. They said my birth mother was a young English woman who couldn't care for me. For years, I accepted that and tried not to think about it too much. But as I got older, I became more curious. I started researching adoption records, hiring private investigators, anything I could do to find answers. And what led you to discover that Camilla was your biological mother? DNA testing, ultimately, Sophie replied. I had submitted my DNA to several genealogy websites hoping to find relatives. In 2023, I got a match with someone who turned out to be a distant cousin of the Parker Bowles family. From there, it was a matter of following the paper trail and connecting the dots. When I realized who my biological mother was, I was shocked, angry, and confused all at the same time. Sarah Morrison turned back to Camilla. How did it feel to receive Sophie's letter, to know that your secret was about to be exposed? Terrifying, Camilla admitted with surprising honesty. But also, in some strange way, relieving. I had carried this secret for so long that it had become a weight on my conscience. Every time I appeared in public, every time I spoke about family values or supporting young mothers, I felt like a hypocrite. The guilt never left me. Charles, who had been largely silent until this point, leaned forward slightly. If I may add something, he said, his voice warm but serious. When Camilla told me about Sophie, my first thought wasn't about the political implications or the potential scandal. It was about my wife's pain, about the burden she had been carrying alone for so many years. And it was about Sophie herself, about the daughter I never knew I had. Your Majesty, Sarah addressed Charles directly. How do you feel about learning that your wife had kept such a significant secret from you throughout your relationship? Charles considered the question carefully before answering. Disappointed, initially. Hurt that she felt she couldn't trust me with this information. But, as I've had time to reflect on it, I understand why she made that choice. The early years of our relationship were difficult enough without additional complications. And the decision to keep Sophie's existence private wasn't just about protecting me or our marriage. It was about protecting Sophie herself from the intense scrutiny that comes with being connected to the royal family. Sarah turned her attention back to Sophie. Sophie, you demanded public acknowledgement from your biological mother. Why was that so important to you? Sophie's composure faltered slightly as she answered, revealing the deep emotion beneath her calm exterior. Because I existed, she said simply. For 37 years, I was a secret, a mistake to be hidden away. I had a right to exist in my biological family's world, not just as a shameful secret, but as a real person with thoughts and feelings and accomplishments of my own. I needed to know that my existence mattered to the woman who gave birth to me. And now that you've received that acknowledgement, how do you feel about your relationship with Camilla and your half-siblings? It's complicated, Sophie admitted. I can't just flip a switch and, suddenly, feel like part of a family after growing up feeling abandoned. But meeting Tom and Laura has been wonderful. They've been incredibly welcoming, and I can see that we share more than just genetics. We have similar values, similar senses of humor, similar ways of looking at the world. As for my relationship with Camilla, we're taking it one day at a time. Sarah Morrison looked directly at Camilla. What do you say to people who might judge you harshly for giving up your daughter? How do you respond to critics who see this as evidence of selfishness or lack of maternal instinct? Camilla's eyes flashed with the only sign of anger she had shown throughout the interview. I would say that they don't understand the reality of what life was like for women in 1973, she replied firmly. I had no money of my own, no career prospects, no support system for raising a child alone. The father, while a good man, was not in a position to marry me or support a family. I genuinely believe that Sophie would have better opportunities, a more stable life, with parents who were established and could provide for her properly. But you went on to have other children with your first husband, Andrew Parker Bowles. How do you reconcile that? By the time Tom was born, I was married, financially secure, and in a completely different position to provide for a child. The circumstances were entirely different. But that doesn't mean I loved Sophie any less or that giving her up was easy. It was the most difficult decision I've ever made, and not a day has passed that I haven't thought about her and wondered if I made the right choice. Sophie's voice came through the video link, softer now than it had been at the beginning of the interview. I want to say something, she said. I've been angry for a long time about being given up, about growing up feeling unwanted and unloved. But these past few weeks, talking to Camilla and getting to know Tom and Laura, I'm beginning to understand that the situation was more complicated than I realized. It doesn't erase the pain I felt growing up, but it helps me understand that the decision wasn't made carelessly or without thought. Where do you see your relationship going from here? Sarah asked. I don't know, Sophie answered honestly. We're all still figuring this out. I think we need time to get to know each other as people, not just as biological relatives. I want to be part of this family, but I also need to maintain my independence, my own life in Paris. It's going to be a balance. Charles spoke up again. Sophie is welcome at any royal function, any family gathering, any time she wants to be part of our lives. She's my daughter now, just as much as William and Harry are my sons. And her children, if she chooses to have them, will be my grandchildren. This family has room for everyone. As the interview drew to a close, Sarah Morrison asked one final question. Camilla, if you could go back and make a different choice in 1973, knowing what you know now about Sophie's life and your own future, would you? Camilla was quiet for a long moment, considering not just the question, but the weight of everything that had led to this moment. That's impossible to answer, she said finally. If I had kept Sophie, my entire life would have been different. I might never have married Andrew, never have had Tom and Laura, never have met Charles. Sophie might have grown up with me, but she also might have faced challenges and limitations that she didn't experience with her adoptive family. All I can do is try to make amends for the pain my decision caused, and hope that we can build a meaningful relationship going forward. The interview concluded with messages of support from William, Harry, Tom, and Laura, all of whom appeared briefly to welcome Sophie into the family and expressed their excitement about getting to know their new sister. The overall tone was one of reconciliation and hope, rather than scandal and division. The public reaction in the hours and days following the interview was overwhelmingly positive. Polls showed that a majority of Britons sympathized with Camilla's impossible situation as a young woman and praised her for finally acknowledging Sophie publicly. The story was covered extensively in the international media, but most coverage focused on the family's grace in handling a difficult situation rather than the scandal itself. More importantly for Camilla, the interview seemed to mark a turning point in her relationship with Sophie. In the weeks that followed, they began to communicate regularly, sharing stories about their lives and gradually building the foundation for a genuine mother-daughter relationship. Sophie visited London several times, attending family dinners and getting to know her half-siblings better. The crisis that had threatened to destroy Camilla's reputation and destabilize the monarchy had instead become a story of redemption and family reconciliation. By choosing honesty over denial, transparency over secrecy, Camilla had not only survived the revelation of her deepest secret but had emerged stronger and more respected than before. 6 months after the interview, Sophie was quietly invited to attend the Trooping the Colour ceremony, standing with the extended royal family on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. The sight of the Queen Consort with her arm around her previously unknown daughter, both smiling genuinely as they waved to the crowds below, became one of the most memorable royal images of the year. The secrets had indeed come to light, but rather than destroying the family, they had ultimately made it stronger. Camilla had learned that the truth, however painful, was always preferable to the burden of secrecy. And Sophie had finally found the acknowledgement and acceptance she had been seeking her entire life. William's laughter at that Trooping the Colour ceremony, caught by photographers as he watched his stepmother and her daughter together for the first time in public, seemed to capture the joy and relief that the entire family felt. The shock that everyone had feared had given way to acceptance, understanding, and ultimately, love. The story that began with a threatening letter had ended with a family reunion, proving that even the most carefully guarded secrets can sometimes lead to unexpected blessings when handled with courage, honesty, and grace.